All right, it looks like we've got a pretty full room, as full as it'll get, and we might as well get started. How was lunch? Sandwiches were good? Thumbs up. Thanks, Bob. All right, so we've got Jason Maynard doing the Cisco-sponsored talk, and no offense to the potential other 5-time Edmonton BSides speakers, but Jason is a 5-time. This is his 5th time presenting at BSides Edmonton, so maybe Prashant, maybe Adam, I'm not sure, but definitely Jason's been here before. Adam, yeah. Jason's bio, Jason has been architecting, designing, deploying security technologies that secure the most complex computing environments for almost 2 decades. His understanding of operational and information technologies, people, and process enable him to deliver effective, comprehensive security solutions that align to an organization's security goals and strategic imperatives. Jason is adept at addressing a range of risk profiles across multiple industry verticals, skills he has cultivated as an end-user security practitioner, partner/integrator, and now manufacturer as a senior multi-domain architect focused on cybersecurity for Cisco systems. Jason is also active in the direct community, speaking at BC Aware Privacy and Security Conference, and has delivered multiple sessions at not just BSides Edmonton, but other BSides as well. And Jason holds over 75 designations across a variety of products and technologies, including the CCIE designation. So with his talk, the Cisco-sponsored talk entitled Advanced Persistent Defenders, APD exclamation point, please welcome to the B-side stage, Jason Maynard.
Can you guys hear me? All the way in the back, can you guys hear me? Awesome. All right. So 5 years at BSides Edmonton. It's pretty amazing the work that they've done putting this event together and seeing all these great people trying to be better when it comes to security. This talk is a little bit interesting. I got thinking a little bit about how do we advance as defenders, and we talk about advanced persistent threats all the time, and I came up with, I think, but maybe it's not, maybe somebody's already came up with it, the term advanced persistent defenders, or threat-informed defenders. We'll talk a little bit about that today. So we're going to talk about who here knows the Pyramid of Pain, and not like one of those other sites that you probably shouldn't be going to. Yeah, everyone knows that one, but not this one. So we'll talk a little bit about Pyramid of Pain. Mitre ATT&CK, who's using Mitre ATT&CK in their organization today? A few, okay. Insight into Attack Navigator, that's a tool within Mitre ATT&CK framework, or Mitre ATT&CK provides us. And anybody do an adversarial emulation? Some, okay, cool. All right, so let's talk about Pyramid of Pain. I think it's David Bianca that created the Pyramid of Pain, but basically what it is it's a pyramid, and as you get higher up in that stack, it gets a little bit more difficult for the adversary to overcome. And so when you look at hash values as an example, every one of us defend using hashes, right? They're very trivial for the adversary to overcome. And this is kind of setting the stage of why we need to elevate our capabilities. It's not to ignore the lower stacked items like hashes and IP addresses and domain names, but it's also to make sure that we're actually elevating. And we'll talk more about that in a second. So I'm not sure how well you're going to see this. Can you guys see it okay in the back with binoculars? No? Well, I'm going to explain it, so that's good, right? And it's going to be recorded, right, Harvinder, right? This is recorded. So you'll be able to see it later anyway. But what I'm showing here is MSF Venom. It's a tool that allows me to create malicious payloads that an adversary may want to leverage to try to drive an outcome. One of those outcomes might be a reverse shell back to me so I can access that machine. Very simple, right? And so as an adversary, I'm going to create this payload and I'm going to find a mechanism to distribute it. It might be a phishing link. It could be an attachment. It could be through all kinds of other means. Or it could be USB keys at an event. How many people picked up a USB key today? Yeah. Right? But anyways, it could be multiple different ways. And so you'll have this SHA at the very bottom here. There's the SHA-256 of that file. And any one of your defensive tools that knows about that SHA, what are they going to do if they see that file? kick it out, right? They're going to block it. So easy, right? That's an easy defensive mechanism that you're going to use, most likely fed through security intelligence. But the adversary can very easily rerun this and get a different output. So that SHA would change. So if they're clever enough, they'll make sure that they're constantly changing that payload, which means that the hash that you're defending against is no longer relevant, right? You're no longer immune to that attack. So the control is bypassed. So that's why it's trivial, right? When we start looking at IP addresses, how many people block based on IPs? Everybody does, right? And this is doing an analysis of a specific piece of piece of malware called Tesla Crypt that probably everybody knows. There's a decryptor out there. It's not relevant today, but it's really about the data points. But you have an IP address, you're going to block it. Easy peasy. Fast flux. So you front this with a domain, you flip out the IPs constantly. Can you block that in other ways? Absolutely. But if you don't have that mechanism in place, the adversary is bypassing all of your controls if you're doing IP-based controls or hash. So again, very easy for the adversary to overcome, but we're not disputing the value of leveraging that capability. Get rid of the noise, right? Now, when it comes to domains, again, we've got a domain. The domain name is X. We block it. We're done, right? But no, the adversary is persistent. And so maybe they're going to use domain-generated algorithms to dynamically create domains, and therefore that domain that you're initially blocking is no longer relevant, and you've bypassed that control. Very easy for them to overcome that specific control. Now, you might say, well, wait a minute, we've got some technology that does some reverse engineering around DGAs, and they're able to predict what the future domain might be. Yeah, that's a control, and it's a valuable one. But at the surface here, the adversary is it's easy for the adversary to overcome. So those are the three kind of core pieces that we use usually through security intelligence, or that you've went into a blog and you've read a bunch of details around the blog and there's a bunch of IOCs. That's typically what we see, and then we feed that into our controls and life is good, right? We hope. As we start moving into the stack, this is where it gets a little bit harder for the adversary to overcome. So for example, if we're using network-based controls like a C2 server that's embedded, or a protocol that's embedded within malware that we're leveraging if it is malware, and we're able to mitigate at that layer, it becomes harder for the adversary to overcome. So an example of that is you've got these known malicious domains, could be DGAs, right, as an example. And you've reversed engineered it. The adversary, what do they have to do to overcome it? Anybody want to throw out an idea? What do you have to do to overcome it? If I have something that has an algorithm that can predict the future or reverse engineer the DGA that you created, how do I overcome that as an adversary? I've got to recreate that payload with the new DGA, right? So that now I'm actually going back to the trenches a bit and having to do some development and recreate the DGA and the algorithm that I'm using in order to overcome your defensive capabilities. Why it's annoying? Well, now it's not about changing an IP or changing the hash value or changing the domain. It's now programmatically having to make a change. That makes it difficult. Then we get into host artifacts. These are artifacts within the host themselves. You got registry key entries, files, directories, mutexes, anything like that resides on the host itself. And this is an example of where malware's looking and trying to disable, the Windows Security Center message saying, hey, alert, alert, the firewall's turned off, right? Your antivirus is turned off. Go turn it back on. They're going to try to suppress that message so you don't know when they disable your defensive capabilities within the platform. Very trivial control or mitigating capability, right? They're trying to reduce noise, not really doing a whole lot, but they are shutting down your protection mechanisms. And if I'm able to defeat that as a defender, again, they have to find another way around this. So maybe they disable it and you get a notification, and now the user goes and enables it, right? Or you have a process that's monitoring it and it re-enables it the moment it's disabled. It makes it hard now for the adversary to disable that antivirus or that protection mechanism that you have on the asset. So again, we're higher in the stack, but they can overcome these controls. Now we get into tools. So for example, if I need to remove volume shadow copies on Windows, right? Everybody knows what volume shadow copies are, right? A constant backup of your Windows systems and file systems so you can restore data. If I need that in order to ensure that you can't recover from ransomware that I've shared with you, right, over friendly terms, maybe not, right? Then it's going to be very difficult, because what's going to happen, you're going to get encrypted, then you're going to recover the data, and you're not going to pay. And so what the adversary has to do is now they have to think of another means, right? Because they're not going to be able to encrypt the drive and force you to pay because you have a recovery mechanism. Now, this is a very simple one localized on the asset, but what if you had a remote platform that was constantly doing backups from those systems? Very hard for them to disable that capability. So now they have to think of another method. Now, what would that method be if I can't encrypt the drive and drive that ransomware outcome? Maybe now it's extortion. So now I got to siphon data from the asset, send it somewhere to say, hey, I've gotten some photos of you last night, right? Now you're going to pay. I might not be able to encrypt your drive, but where you were last night, you're going to pay me anyway, right? Again, the adversary has to now come up with another method. And then you get into TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures, right? And this is where it's very difficult for the adversary to overcome. And this is an example of some TTPs that could be captured, and we'll talk more about those in a second. But in order for the adversary to overcome them, it's very, very difficult. So this is an example here of Tesla Crypt needing to drive the ability to encrypt on the asset. Now, if I can't encrypt, so if I have some technology, doesn't matter the vendor, if the capability exists and it monitors the system for any activity that tries to encrypt files, okay? Maybe one or two files get encrypted and then that process gets killed, because that's what that software does. It manages and watches to see if there's some behavior that isn't normal, such as encrypting the drive at mass automatically for no good reason. It kills that process. Now, once that happens, think about the adversary. As I mentioned, you have to maybe think about what you're going to do in order to get them to pay or drive some kind of monetary fund or disrupt, whatever the goals of the adversary is. But maybe now I've got to steal credentials, right? Because the encrypted portion of my activities is never going to be realized. And so now I want to maybe harvest credentials. How am I going to do that? Well, maybe I need a Mimikatz type capability within malware to harvest those credentials. So now I get username and passwords and hope there's no MFA within the environment, and I can start logging in as users within the environment. So it makes it very, very difficult, right? Because you're making them go all the way back to the beginning and rethink their plans. And it's very, very disruptive, not as a defender, but as an adversary. So an example of this would be, you have this particular piece of ransomware has a whole bunch of tactics and techniques that are part of it. And we'll talk more about it, but there's things like initial access, execution, persistence, and so on that the adversary must achieve in order to drive an outcome. Now, how often does the adversary need to be right within this attack chain or kill chain, right? They have to be successful in almost every portion of it in order to drive an outcome. Where do we have to be successful as defenders? Anyone? No one? Was lunch that good? Your hand's up. You have to answer now. That's right. Yes. One of them. See? Cisco people give them something. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. You have to go to the booth. But anyways, yeah, you're right. We only have to be right in one spot. They have to be right in the entire kill chain. So the advantage is to the defender. So why are we getting popped so much, right? And I think it's because there's complexity within the environments that we defend against. And it's some of the tooling that we have may have become a little bit more complicated than they have to be. And we're not defending at the right layer. It doesn't mean, again, you get rid of hashes, IPs, and domains. You still do that, but you elevate the game. So what does this do for us? Right? It increases the cost of the adversary for doing business, right? At least with us. It provides us time-based defense. If they have to go up higher in the stack and change their tactics and techniques, guess what? We've got time now on our side to use other defensive capabilities to disrupt that one area that won't allow them to be successful. So what is Mitre? Well, Mitre is a nonprofit company out of the US, and it's public-private partnerships and focused on cybersecurity. These are the folks that bring you CVEs, right? Vulnerability Exposure Database. And they've created what is now known as ATT&CK, and ATT&CK is really focused on adversarial tactics, techniques, and provides common knowledge around how the adversary goes about compromising an environment. And it was born in 2013. Again, it focuses on those TTPs, as I mentioned. There's a global accessible knowledge base. You can use it to help develop threat models and methodologies around private sector, public sector, government, and so on. But really, it focuses on the adversarial's perspective, the who, right, the adversary, their goals, the why, and then the methods, the how. And who would leverage this? Well, it could be red teamers, blue teamers. You can use it for gap analysis, assessments, adversarial emulation. We're going to talk a little bit more about those as we go along too. Everybody knows what a threat is, right? I'm dropping it down a bit because I know we've got all kinds of different skill sets within the audience. So in order for a threat to be realized, you need a capability, an intent, and an opportunity. So the capability could be the adversary's tooling, skills, education, supply chain. So for example, it develops an undisclosed exploit, increases their capabilities, right? The problem with that portion of it is we have no control as defenders at this piece. None, zero. You can't control this. They're doing this out of band, 100%. But we need to understand the adversarial's knowledge. And again, that's where ATT&CK comes in. Now, intent is really the adversary's motivation, right? Their intent or willingness to succeed. So why are they doing it? Well, profit, espionage, impacts to supply chain, hacktivisms. Those are some of the outcomes. Again, how much control do we have? Zero, none. But again, we need to understand the adversary. The opportunity, it comes to timing and knowledge of the target. This is the vulns, the 0 days, time of business. This is where we have the ability to add a control or a mitigating capability to defend or defeat the adversary. So this could be things as simple as patching and networking, segmentation, MFA. Anybody here heard of it, right? MFA. But the adversary continues to elevate their capabilities. As you add controls, they find ways around them. This is a never-ending game. So think about this as the analogy, right? You've got some criminal robber, right? And they're portraying to be somebody from anybody get it where this says energy, come show me your bill. Come to the door, show me your bill, right? And you see that, maybe you don't open the door, but lots of people do, right? They see that, they trust the person, they open the door. And if the robber or criminal wants to rob you at that point, you've just given them access to your home, right? And so you open the door, the intruder gains access and does whatever they want to do. They go to another neighborhood, guess what? They do the same thing. They knock on the door, you see the badge, you open the door, the intruder now has access to your home. Now, by this time, police are informed, right, by other homeowners that this is taking place. So they know now there's a robber portraying as an energy company. They want to gain access to your home. They use fake credentials in order to achieve that outcome, right? And so think of Mitre, right? Mitre's part of that, right? It's very similar. The robber's the adversary. The tactic that they want to do is to gain access to your home. And the technique that they're using to gain access is these fake badges that Harv gave out earlier today. But anyways, now they go to the third home. But now we're educated. We know a little bit about it. Knocks on the door, opens the door, or doesn't, right? At this point, does not open the door because we know that this activity is taking place. Call police, we shut it down, right? So that's the analogy, right? That's why we want to work at these layers. Even though we've got the door shut, the door might even be locked, right? Those are our hash values, our IP addresses, right? But the adversary is going to elevate their capability. Think of it too as like the periodic table, right? This is the most important tool in chemistry, right? Describes all the details around it. It's concise. You can't do anything in chemistry without it. And you can take two of some elements and make stuff, right? So 2 hydrogen, 1 oxygen creates H2O. Mitre ATT&CK is very much the same thing. You've got a column of tactics, reconnaissance, initial access, etc. And then you have techniques. How do they drive that outcome? And then there's sub-techniques that may be specific to a higher level technique. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But it describes the objectives desired by the adversary. So, for example, if they want to get initial access, privileged escalation, these are the steps that they're going to take in order to drive that outcome. And the other thing that it provides is not only the tactic, the technique, sub-technique, but also the procedures that are involved. So it'll include a lot of details around the mitigation capabilities within the platform as well. So what does that look like? Well, a tactic would be privileged escalation. So this is the adversary trying to get higher escalation. So if, for example, if I get on a Windows asset that's only got a local user that's not a local admin, I want to get admin access to that asset. And then eventually I want to get access to the domain controller and get enterprise admin there, right? That's escalating my privilege over time. Now, the technique for me to do this could be something like boot or log on auto start for execution. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to leverage the registry keys within Windows, and I'm going to put in some things to automatically run that may help me elevate my privilege. You can use this for persistence as well, but that's what the adversary is looking to do in order to get escalated privileges. Now, if I make it impossible or difficult, or I monitor, because you can't defend against everything, I monitor these keys, for example, then I could trigger or at least know that an adversary may be in the environment, and if I can lock it down, guess what? They can't use that tactic and technique and sub-technique, right? The game is over. They got to find a different way. So again, we concentrate on the root of the problem to achieve a security outcome. And so think of the 3 layers at the bottom as the symptom. So they're good, they drive a specific outcome, and they can defend against very, commoditized type attacks. Even if they're a little bit advanced, IP hashes and domain names aren't, right? That component of it is never going to be advanced. And so, obviously, we can leverage them, but the problem with that is it's easy for the adversary or attacker to overcome. Now you get into the problem statement. So as you get up higher, network, host artifacts, tools, TTPs, it makes it very, very difficult. Now, there is a challenge for defenders here, right? For example, if I'm the adversary and I need PowerShell in order to move laterally within the network, and you shut down PowerShell, guess what? I can't do it. But if you also use PowerShell as a management tool within the environment, it might be very difficult for you to shut it down, or WMIC in a Windows environment, etc., right? So again, it's hard because there's nuance. There's some tactics and techniques that are being leveraged that operationally you cannot remove. So that's where you're going to have to leverage or rely on things that can detect maybe certain activities that might be taking place, or looking for another area within that chain where you can defend against. So what is inside ATT&CK? So it's fed with open source, blog entries, research and development from Mitre, community feeds. The good thing about this is real data that's happening live, right? This is not some scenario someone's thinking that could happen. These are actually being realized in the wild. And so you got 14 techniques. When you look at, there's a couple of breakdowns, and we'll get into those. But for enterprise, we've got mobile and ICS as well. But for enterprise, there's 14 techniques as of the 4th of November. There's 193 techniques, 401 sub-techniques, and then there's 135 groups like APT 33 that leverage these tactics and techniques. And then they're leveraging about 718 software applications, and then there's a bunch of mitigating controls. So the nice thing about this as well is not only are you defending at the TTP level, you have now the ability to build in mitigating controls just by going to Mitre and learning a little bit about the adversary, right? You might not be able to control all the TTPs that you discover, but there's going to be enough mitigating capabilities within typically, not always, within the analysis that you're doing that you can add to your environment and hopefully make it difficult for the adversary that they move on to another organization. So enterprise has Windows, Mac, OS, and Linux. Cloud has IaaS, SaaS, and O365. Google Workspaces, Azure AD. They've got containers and networks. Mobile's got iOS and Android. So you can be at the enterprise level, or you can drop down into these specific areas of interest. And then there's the ICS Mitre ATT&CK framework that you could leverage as well. You can also use sticks, taxi feeds coming out of the platform, Navigator Matrix. We're going to show you a little bit of how we look at an adversary's tactic and techniques, and then we overlay this with our controls, and then we look at the gaps. So we do a gap analysis to determine where the gaps are in our environment, and then we can either accept that risk, meaning that there's enough controls in other areas to mitigate the overall risk, or we address them, right, because they're a concern. And that's an example of a sticks output, right? You've got a threat actor attributed to a campaign, and there's a whole bunch of different models that support that. So understanding the Mitre ATT&CK relationships between each one. So you have a group over here, right? You've got a group that uses a technique that's driven with software that's trying to accomplish something, the tactic. And so over here, you've got APT33, right? The adversarial group that's going to leverage Mimikatz to do credential dumping, and their goal is credential access, right, to systems. There's mitigating capabilities that may outline some preventative capability, and they're all labeled for you too, right? So again, now you're using a common language between all the people that you deal with that everyone can understand exactly what you're talking about. You're not making this up, right? It's a standard language for the community. And so now we've got APT33, the tactic is credential access. They're using Mimikatz, that's the software. And the technique is actually dumping the LSA secrets from the Microsoft operating system. And so it's accessing the registry and dumping those keys down. And then obviously you're going to look to crack those credentials to gain access to the systems. So here's a little demo of Mitre ATT&CK. So let me just fast forward it here. This is my new intro on my YouTube channel, right? You like it? No? It's got some scary kind of music at the beginning, but anyways, I'll get feedback later. Wow, no laughter. Hopefully the lunch was okay. But anyway, so this is Mitre ATT&CK. This is the website. You've got your matrices on the side. That's enterprise, Windows, Mac OS, Linux, cloud, network, etc. You've got mobile and ICS. And then on this side, you can see an example of the matrix and the tactics and techniques that would be associated to that specific matrix. And each one's different because they're different use cases, right? There's different tactics and techniques that the adversary is going to leverage. Now, if we wanted to focus in on enterprise, all we do is go to tactics and look at enterprise, and we can see the 14 tactics that are called out specifically, and we can drill into each one of these. Has anybody been up to the site at all? If you haven't, you should bookmark. If you're a defender or even a red teamer, you should bookmark it, because the red teamers can use it to find holes within an organization and highlight where the gaps might be, and defenders can use it to defend. But now I've jumped into the tactic, and then you've got your technique, it's sub-technique. Here you've got a boot or log on auto start, and it shows you over here on the, and I'm just going to move my mouse with the other. There's the tactic. So this particular technique actually has persistence and privilege escalation. It can be used in both places, right? Persistence is I get access to the system all the time, and privilege escalation is gaining elevated privileges. And again, you scroll down, it's got all the procedures, the details around it, softwares that is associated to it, mitigation, if there is any, that'll be outlined here. Any detective capabilities that exist will be called out here as well. And then tons of reference documents, right? Again, these are real world scenarios. We're not making this up. So there is papers that you guys can reference to get better insight into how the adversary might be going about this particular technique or tactic, depending on the level that you're looking at. Then you've got things like data sources, mitigations, groups, software, campaigns, and each one of these you can drill into. I'm just going to fast forward just a little bit here. The other really cool thing is, and I'll show this in the example, is that I can come in and look at my specific vertical. So I can look at adversarial groups that are targeting my area that I'm defending for. And so you could do this with finance, education, etc. And it gives you an outline of any software, any group that might be targeting your specific vertical, and it gives you details around it. And I can build a matrix up specifically to that vertical and then focus on the adversaries that are actually coming after me versus all the commodity-based stuff, all the noise, right? One of our biggest problems is patching systems, right? You get a vulnerability, but you get thousands of them. So which one do you prioritize, right? You probably want to prioritize one that's actively being exploited and that's a popular target before something that's got the same CVS score, but much lower in regards to popularity, and there is no active exploit, but it's still ranked as 10. So this screenshot here is showing you the Mitre ATT&CK Navigator tool. So you can do this on the web, or you can do this, you can download it and run it on your own box. So I have it running on a Kali box because that's where I do both the red and the blue team side from in my analysis. But you can have it localized on your box and save everything locally so you have it there. But I can then take that finance and I could take all the groups associated with that, and I have a nice matrix that shows me all the tactics and techniques that the adversary is using, or the adversaries in this case. And then I can look at my my controls that I have in the environment, and I can overlay to see the discrepancies between the two. So this is where we get into building threat-informed defense, right? Advanced persistent defense, the threat picture. How do we build this out? And so here's the example, right? There's Navigator, and you could be looking at a specific adversary campaign, a vertical, whatever it might be. And these are all the things that this particular adversary is going to use, right? So initial access, well, they're looking for the exploit publicly facing application, right? Replication through removable media. Well, that might be easy. If I didn't allow removable media on an asset, then that eliminates that risk, right? And so that's the opportunity as defenders, is to go through this and truly understand how the adversary is going to go about compromising my environment. So when we draw it out, we have the ability to start right from scratch, come in, you type in something like financial, it gives you all the outputs, and then you could look at it from an adversarial like Deep Panda. So if you wanted to focus on a specific adversarial group and understand how you defend or line up against that particular adversary, then you can actually import that into Navigator, see all their TTPs. Then again, like I said, you can overlay that with any of the controls that you might have in the environment. And I'll show you that example. I've got a couple of them actually. All right, so build your own coverage map. So this is an example of that, and we're going to go right into this in a second here. But you can even through Navigator. So I showed you in the Mitre ATT&CK tool set, when you go to the website, you can actually go in and put in finance, and it gives you the output, and you can see that. But in Navigator, you can do that on within the tool base itself. And so this is showing you that example here. Once you have it, say, downloaded on your local machine, you can have it all saved, localized, and then you can start looking at, in this case, education, because I thought it would be relevant for today. I can look at all the threat groups that are associated to education. In this case, there's 9 threat groups that target education. Then I can have my rubric score, right? Again, set some thresholds. That means something within the organization itself. Obviously should align to whatever rubrics that we're using for risk within the organization. And then once I do that, I can start looking at these in detail as much as I want. I can add comments to it. I could look at the tactic and technique. If I'm not really familiar about how the adversary goes about it, I need a little bit of education. I can do that all from this page. I don't need to go back to the main Mitre ATT&CK page and do that. I can pivot right from here and get access to that data as needed. So I've got 3 demos. One is looking at a specific threat. So this is a specific threat that You can use any vendor. It's not specific to Cisco or anybody else. If they have any mapping, you'll be able to pull that data into Navigator. And so you can see here, this does a good job of letting you know about the registry keys, the file hashes, all the indications of compromise. There's some other details here. It really doesn't matter because all I want to know about is the TTPs, this particular threat, not necessarily an adversary, because an adversary, many adversaries may be leveraging this, but I want to know the TTPs for this particular threat. And so I can see here they've got persistence, privilege escalation, all of that's available to me now in regards to the adversary's ability. Now, if I import that using something like JSON, I import it into Navigator, I now see that, right? And so I've give it a name, I've given it a score of 1, and it'll show that in a second. I can also pivot into each one of these. But very clearly, I know that they use persistence for both persistent and privilege escalation over here. I can see that it's used in twofold, right? It's used for persistence and privilege escalation. So again, if I can monitor that key, maybe I can't stop it, maybe I can, but if I monitor, at least I know if there's any changes to the organization, right? Or at least that asset, I should say. Now, if I have an endpoint product, this is an example. If I bring that endpoint product's capabilities in, and again, there's different thresholds here. Green means that there's a lot more of that capability. There's a lot of nuance in this, right? Of how that control might be met. For example, red might be, I've got more coverage, green would be less coverage of that particular tactic and technique. Now I know where my endpoint capabilities are. So that's pretty easy, right? Now I've got a good understanding of my controls in my environment, and I've got a good understanding of the ransomware or that specific threat. Now what I have the ability to do, let me just fast forward, is take this, again, do some research about each one of these if I need to. So this is showing you, we're jumping into that boot or log on auto start, the registry keys, startup folder, how they're leveraging this for both persistence and privilege escalation. Again, any mitigating capabilities I can start implementing, anything I can do to detect changes to that, I'm going to flag or try to implement within the organization if I haven't already. But more importantly, what I want to do is create a third layer here, right? And this, I think, is where the beauty comes in. Now I'm able to take both A, which is the threat, B, which is my controls, and create C, right, which is a combination, just highlight that where the gaps may still exist. So basically what I'm saying is take A and B, and then anything that's not here, so what I'm going to do is actually write a very simple expression, right? A and not in B, right? Then highlight it. We'll go ahead. There's some other things that you can set, like coloring, gradient, links, metadata. You can add all of that. And I show that in the video as you walk through it. And now I can see this, right? I can see that I have defensive capabilities in majority of the adversary's ability. But there is some areas of opportunity for me as a defender. This is what I mean by leveling up the game. This isn't an IP. This is not a hash. This is not a domain. That's stuff you're already doing. Right? And most likely that's already being fed through some auto-generated tool, right? Outside of the research that you might do that you uncover maybe an IP or domain or hash, but most of it's going to be done through a programmatic feed of some sort. And so here I've got a couple of opportunities. Communication through removable media. As I mentioned earlier, if I now have a capability to say, maybe even as simple as using group policy objects to mitigate the access to USB keys, right? You can't enter it. Maybe it's as simple as that. Or I have a software-based tool that says if you plug in a USB key and it's storage, you can't access that device. But that's, now I'm elevating it. Or I might be, you know what, that risk is so low of having something come in through removable media, I accept that risk. And I have other controls elsewhere within the organization to mitigate that. All right, so this one here is APT 33. So I'm gonna go a little bit faster here because I'm sure you don't want to see kind of the two examples. I'll show you the output here. But basically, I can come in here and grab APT 33. So if for whatever reason there's a new campaign a threat that's released out and saying, look, at APT's doing X, Y, and Z. We saw that a lot with Ukraine when the war started, right? There was certain adversaries that you're going to look for. And then you're going to start building your defensive capabilities. This is one way of coming in and saying, okay, APT-33 is on the prowl. There's stuff that they're doing. I want to learn a little bit more about them. This is a good way of doing that. And then I could import that into Navigator, right? Once I import it into Navigator, I now have their capabilities outlined here. You can see them here, right? So this is APT. You can give it whatever name you want. Exploitation for client execution, exploitation for privilege escalation, valid accounts, network sniffing. Like, these are some of the things that you can do. So think about network sniffing. There might be things that you can do to minimize or alert you that activity might be happening in the environment. It's not a control. Right? That's not the only thing that you're going to do here. Detection and response capabilities could be as important, if not more important, than the ability to prevent, right? No matter how many tools you have, how many vendors you deal with, you're never going to prevent 100% of everything 100% of the time. So the ability to detect and understand a threat and then ultimately respond and reduce the overall attack surface is going to be critical, right? Reduce that blast radius. Oh, I jumped too quick, sorry. And then we're going to create another tab. In this case, I'm going to pull in another bunch of capabilities maybe I've collected. So I've taken all my tool sets as an example, and I've went in and I've created a matrix for all of my tools. And you've probably, what happened there? Just a second, sorry. That jumped. And then, so what's going to happen here is, hopefully, you've got a lot of this coverage, right? When you take your entire stack of and this takes some work, right? You're probably going to have to reach out to your vendors and get them to kind of break down. There's nuance in this too, right? So they might say that they have a capability to detect a TTP, right? But not the ability to control or mitigate, right? So there's going to be some nuance here, and that's where the color coding may come in. But let's say you go through and you've done that analysis, you've grabbed all your tool sets and you've shown your coverage. How many people have done this? Have went through this exercise? See, very little. And it's unfortunate, right? And again, it's because we're so busy doing the commodity-based stuff, it's hard to make time to do this. It's like, a lot of times if you're building an infrastructure, you're going through and you're building out that infrastructure, you get it built, you could have programmed it, which may have taken another week, and then replicate it forever. But because it takes an extra week, you do it the other way, right? And every single time you have to recreate it. Same thing here. If you put in the work, it does take some work, but it'll save you a ton of time later. And also increase your overall defensive capability and knowledge in regards to how you're defending. So you can see there's pretty wide coverage here. You can almost see every single tactic. Remember, tactics are at the top, has coverage. And then technique, again, has some coverage, and then there's sub-techniques depending on the technique itself, okay? So I've got that. If I now do A versus B and I look at my gap, in fact, in this case, I don't have any. Now, again, there's nuance into this, right? But this might be enough to understand that, we've got a lot of good coverage for this particular adversary that we don't need to focus on this, right? We've got enough defensive and alerting capabilities in play. Let's move on and focus on something else of value to the business. Not focus on trying to add something that's not going to add a whole lot of value to the organization. Like maybe, even if something like removable disk or media was the one thing that you didn't have coverage on. That could be an acceptable risk, right? So it's time to move on. All right, so last but not least, at least in Mitre, is this one's just showing in education. So let me just jump back in here. Oh boy, here we go. You guys see that too? Yeah. So this is Windows. No, Windows is good. Just not today. But anyways, we'll see what happens here. But this is taking, this one's looking at it from a vertical perspective. But the same thing applies here. Now you look at education, you add all the threat groups, software, anything that you want that might be targeting education. You create your analysis, right? So your matrix. Now you know all the tactics and techniques, the adversaries, because adversaries this time, not just one. is going to leverage in order to compromise the environment. And then you're going to take your controls, right? Your detect, prevent, and response capabilities. You're going to overlay it and look for the gaps that you might have in the organization. And then you're going to build that out. And you could save this. I show you where you can save out the matrix. When you do that, when you put the two layers on top of each other, you can save that matrix out and put it in your risk analysis report. Right? You can build it out and say, look, we've investigated, these are the adversaries that target education, these are the tactics and techniques that they leverage, and here's a nice screenshot of what that looks like, at least for the internal teams. I have a feeling if I pull this out, it might come back. That's not good. Any questions or comments up to now? Because we need, I need like a few minutes here. Anybody? Oh, do we have to do the mic thing? Yeah.
Are there any questions? We'll insert a Scotty Star Trek joke about pushing it too hard, Captain.
Yeah, it's frozen.
So we have about 5 minutes. We can certainly address any questions, or you just wanted to finish off your presentation in the dark?
Well, I can. I guess I'm going to have to. It's unfortunate. I do have this fully recorded already, though, the full session. So maybe that's what I'll do. I'll share it with BSides, the full version. So the next stage of this is adversarial emulation. So the ability to act as the adversary itself. And I've got a demo here where we use, anybody know Caldera? There's a bunch of adversarial tools out there, right? But anyways, I leverage Caldera where then now we can look at the TTPs the adversary might do. So we can create a campaign, specifically something that we want to test within our organization to see how our defensive capabilities align to the adversary's ability. And so I walk through that where we actually use Caldera. We send out an agent to a couple of boxes. I actually have this all built with Terraform, and it's all automatic, right? I took the time to do it up front, did all the programming, and now I just go, and I can recreate the environment at any time. But the point is that now I can run those campaigns against my defensive tools and understand how the adversary is doing certain elements, and then analyze those and either mitigate those risks that I identify, or have confidence that I have mitigating controls in place or detective capabilities to let me know something's happening within the organization. So to me, this is where you start really leveling up, because now you're not only, leveling up from a defensive perspective, focusing on TTPs, not ignoring the other stuff, but focusing on TTPs, as well as really honing in your skills of understanding how the adversary operates. I always believe that great defenders really understand the adversary side of it, because if you can think like the adversary, then you can put your feet in their shoes, and then you can look at the opportunities within your environment. Caldera allows you to do that, right? It allows you to create those campaigns and run those attacks against your and they could be very, very sophisticated. Like I'm talking about 100 different types of activities that might be taking place that you can actually build out, hit go, it'll go out and do that, it'll call back to the CNC server, and then even if you have this in a lab environment, which you probably want to, right? This is going to be restricted area in your environment that you're testing in because it is adversarial. But then you can say, well, wait a minute, the CNC server was IPX, and then you can go in and change the IP, right? In your controls, and then try the attack again. That's very trivial, right? That's that low, commodity-based stuff. But the tactic or technique, if they need to write to the registry and you remove that ability, or they need to sudo to get root access, and you don't allow that, that individual to ever do that, then they're never ever going to gain that credential and move forward. So that's kind of the advanced persistent defense capability that I'm thinking and trying to educate us as defenders that yes, there's a lot of great stuff we do, but there's a ton of opportunity for us to make it very, very difficult for the adversary. And it's still
awesome. Well, thank you, Jason.
No worries. Thanks.
So we do have time for one quick question, if anybody's got any questions, or if there's a computer expert who knows how to kick it.
Oh, no. Don't go to that guy at the back. Yeah, we need somebody to fix my machine.
Sorry, was there? Oh, yeah, I got a question here.
There's always one in every crowd, guys.
Thanks, Jason. Beautiful talk. More on the research side too, how you connect the dots. So my question is more on how do you commoditize this in a organization which is busy just defending or busy just trying to, keep the lights on, right? Like this is definitely an A game Mitre framework. You get through all this and trying to get on the defender side. So just curious on how do you make it more practical for defenders to consume it in their own organizations and make it more better?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that's the challenge, right? It's always about keeping the lights on. But if it's always about keeping the lights on, you're never going to get to these things, right? And so you got to make time. I mean, it's that simple. You're going to make time. It's like you're going to pay me now or pay me later. But you are going to invest time in understanding an adversary or a threat group or a threat campaign, something somewhere down the line. The problem is most likely when you have the time to do that, guess what you're faced with? An incident. Because it's actually realized within your organization. So now you're taking the time to understand what the adversary is doing and then build in the mitigating and capabilities and detection, response, and all that jazz, but you've been hit, you've been popped, right? Credibility starts to get hit. So it comes down to anything, like whether you're in networking, system, storage, security, you've got to make time. That's it. You have to say that maybe there's a certain portion of the day or week that you devote to elevating the game. And maybe that's the campaign that you do internally. But you're right, everybody's faced with keeping the lights on. But everybody's been doing that forever. It hasn't fared well for any of us, right? And you're going to give up your time maybe now, or you're going to give it up at Christmas, like last year, right? Log4j. Oh, wait, that's tomorrow. But yeah, it's a tough one. You got to make the time.
Awesome.